Okay, we've got our recording on. We've got our Facebook Live happening, and it is just the top of the hour. So welcome everyone. This is Maggie Ostara, and I am delighted to be here with you today in our Sovereignty by Design Facebook group. And this will soon be a podcast. It'll be available via audio and will also be available on YouTube as a replay later on. So if you aren't able to watch all of it, you can either watch it in the Facebook group, or if you're on Zoom, you can connect later on YouTube. So I want to welcome you who are coming in. Hi, everybody is coming in live on Zoom. Hi to those of you who are here on Melissa and Patrick, saying hi on Facebook Live. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my chat. I'm just going to invite you to select attendees as well as panelists, and to say hi as you're coming in, and tell us where you're coming in from. And I will be taking a note of that in a couple of minutes as you start to populate the chat. And I can see you're out there. I know you're out there. So go ahead and say hi. And I want to give just a little bit of an introduction. Hi, Janice. Janice is on Facebook Live. To what we're going to be doing today, and also to what Sovereignty by Design is about. And today we're really talking about sovereignty. And I'm going to embed that inside of the events that are happening in the United States right now, and that there are parties that are responding with their own voices in many parts of the world to what has been happening here. It's really a historic moment that we're experiencing here on, June 3rd, 2020. I think most of us, when we came into 2020, didn't necessarily think that this was how the year was going to unfold. But I do know that for me, towards the end of last year, the very beginning of this year, I was like, something is going to happen this year. I don't know exactly what it is. And then I thought it was COVID. And now it is hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people who are rising up against police brutality, against systemic racism, against our blindness in the different levels of privilege that we may have, and for a more equitable, a more sustainable, a more righteous, a more just society. And these are all things that I definitely stand for and have been devoted to in different ways throughout my life. So go ahead, say hi, who you are. I can see that you're here. So go ahead and say hi, who you are in the chat. I don't know why it is hard for people to get started sometimes, but go ahead. Say your name, where you're calling in from. Let me know if you've got anything on your mind right now today. I am a pure generator, so I like to have things to respond to. Okay, so give me some stuff to respond to. That's great. And of course, I'm really, in mentioning what's happening in my country, our country, for those of us who are from here, is we have a lot to respond to, right? We have a lot to respond to. And as I said in my email that went out today, I was really talking about my belief that sovereignty, it is a concept whose time has come. It's something I've been engaged with for a long time, over 20 years now, both individually in my own personal development and also with my clients. And it's been a foundational concept and practice inside of all of the programs that I've developed over the last 15 years. Some of you have participated in some of them. It was the basis of the Soul Signature Awareness Project that I created. It's the basis of the Wheel of Power. Some of you, I know, have experienced that. It was the basis of all the business work that I did, the business coaching that I did. And so this is not a new thing for me to be bringing up. It's actually something that I've been really embedded in and steeped in for a long time. And I want to say right here at the outset that I believe sovereignty is a practice. It is not a destination that you reach. I think it is something that is, we practice, we learn about it, we embrace it, we discover more and more of it as we go along. And I do believe that sovereignty is a key, probably not the key, but a fundamental key for us to be able to really evolve through this kind of immaturity that we continue to live inside of here in this country. I really can't speak about other countries because I haven't lived in other places. It may be true that this is the case in other places, but we have what many people have called kind of adolescent society here in the United States. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not going to take a deep dive into that today. But although I will over the course of subsequent weeks through these webinars, and it's a big part of what my forthcoming book is about, called Women Becoming Sovereign, Evolving Ourselves and Transforming Our World. And so that is the current work that I'm really involved in. And human design is embedded inside of that as well. It's an enormously beneficial tool for us to understand about that. But we are in this moment where we're getting to see the places where we have been willing to go along with aspects of our attitudes, our behaviors, our ways of being in the world that I would call adolescent. They are entitled, they are privileged, they are self-centered, and often self-absorbed. And so this is what we, really practicing and emerging into greater and greater sovereignty helps us to emerge out of our self-absorbedness, to release some of our entitlement, and to help us to know how to be able to use our privilege for the greater good of all. I don't know that I believe that we can get rid of our privilege, but you learn how to utilize it in ways that are not just self-serving, or not just serving for the tribe that we might consider ourselves to be a part of, but how do we help to evolve the collective by utilizing the privilege that we have. And I'll just say for me, like, I have two main forms of privilege. One is my skin color, being white. The other is my education. I do have some resource privilege, and I do have some privilege by being a US citizen, absolutely. I did not come from a wealthy family. I've never really been wealthy, although I have been relatively well-resourced. But I do have an enormous amount of education, and I come from a highly educated family. That's my lineage. And so that has empowered and enabled me in enormous ways throughout my life. And then, of course, my white skin privilege has just, without me doing anything, has made me safer, has made me able to speak my mind in ways that other people who do not have the same skin color that I have not been able to do with as much freedom or as much safety as I have. So I want to just name that at the outset, and I want to dive into what I feel qualified to teach about and to speak about, and why, and what I don't feel qualified to teach about and speak about. Okay, so I want to just say hello to some of you who are coming in. So Bianca is here from Sacramento. Sherry is here from Brighton in the UK. Sherry, welcome. Mary Feynman is here from Northern California, from Oakland. Glad to be here. Mary Gatchins is here. She says, thanks for bringing in the social justice piece. How we respond in these times is so important to be conscious activists. Yes. Antoinette is here from Hamilton, Ohio. Thank you for offering this program. You're welcome. Antoinette, thank you for being here. Catherine Chess. Hi, Catherine. It's because it's time to be here to change our lives for the better. Love and sovereignty are the answers. Yes. Kate is here from Colorado. Hi, Kate. Happy to be with you. Happy to hear about sovereignty during the upheaval in our world. Eager to use my gifts and skills to help and to be of service for the good of all. Yes. Awesome. And Sheila Marie is here from Nevada. Hi, Sheila Marie. She says, I'm wondering what I can do from my staycation, which at my age, I imagine will last a while longer. Yes, I know. And yes, regarding, and Mary's back saying, regarding human design, as a heretical investigator, how I respond and what I do in right timing is super important. Sheila Merle, sorry, Sheila Merle. Yeah. Um, yeah, it is. It is. So we are not going to get super deep into human design today, although I will be making some connections, and we will be doing more and more of that as we go along. All right. So I just want to say hi to Sandy, who's also here on Facebook Live. All right. Yeah, anybody else who's here on Facebook Live, if you want to say hello, please do so. And do be putting your comments, your ahas, your questions, either into the chat or into the comments on Facebook, and I'll be coming back to them in a little bit. I actually don't have slides today, so I'm just going to be sharing because I actually decided to change a bit of what I was going to share today in the last 24 hours and have been really mulling over that, what I wanted to start with. Okay, so so what I feel qualified to teach about and to share about and why. Some of these things you may know about me, some of them you may not. I grew up in an African-American neighborhood in the 60s, and it was a Black neighborhood back then. We didn't even have the term African-American. And I was a little kid during the 60s, and then I came of age during the 70s. And you know, it wasn't a huge Black community in Seattle, but I lived right smack in the middle of it. And so I was one of a few Black kids in my classes. We went to a Black church. My mom was on the PTA. My dad was involved with some local Black leaders for doing programs for youth. My dad was a professor, an English professor. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and so she did kind of mom stuff like PTA, and she helped with my campfire group, which was primarily Black girls along with me. And so that's really the environment that I grew up inside of. And I was exposed to Black studies at the very beginning of it. I think it started like even in grade school in the 60s, because, you know, kind of the movement for the visibility and listening to Black voices and the visibility of the Black experience was rising while I was a little kid. And in my community, there were people that were really interested in that. And so the education started coming in pretty early for me. And then, you know, through middle school and through the first part of high school, I ended up going away for the last 2 years of high school. But so I think I started learning about Black studies before a lot of other, certainly white kids did, who were in more white schools in other neighborhoods and in other towns. And so it was something that, you know, I just kind of took in. And at the same time, I also knew I was part of a majority in the US, right? And I don't think I was really cognizant that I wasn't part of a minority, a part of a majority in the world at that time, because my point of view was pretty stuck on the US and it wasn't really complete or big, but I kind of knew because I could watch TV and see that most of the people on TV were white. And so I would talk to my parents about it and be like, yeah, no, actually, you know, and I'm like, okay, but here, or even going to other parts of Seattle, right? Clearly other parts of Seattle were primarily white. It's just that where we were, it wasn't. So I had this kind of bifurcated experience of being like, okay, I'm in a minority here, but I'm part of a majority culture elsewhere. And how does that kind of work, right? And I was there during the time when Martin Luther King was assassinated and when Malcolm X was assassinated. I lived, you know, with Black Panthers in our community, doing different variety of community service that they were doing at the time. And so, you know, I think that I certainly I'm not a part, have never been a part of the Black experience. It's not something that's possible for me as a white person. But I think I was probably a little more up close and personal than a lot of people were. And so it definitely has shaped me. It definitely imprinted me. And there were times when, you know, there were racist slurs. I would have to say that from my point of view, racism includes power. So, and I know this is kind of a debate that's out there, and you see it on Facebook, you know, where people say, well, you know, people of color are racist too. And what I would say is that anybody can be prejudiced, okay? But racism includes power. So white people are racist. People of color are generally not racist because they don't have the power to enforce, their race supremacy, like in this country. Okay, so there was prejudice that I experienced as a white person. There was racism that I experienced towards people that I was around. But there was also a lot of just, we're the kids growing up and, doing whatever together because that's what was happening in my neighborhood. So it was really a mixed experience for me in that way. And later on, when I went away to high school and I was in a primarily white environment, first went to college in a primarily white environment, always, though, when I was able to select where I lived, I always lived in crossover neighborhoods because I didn't feel right living in a white environment. It was, it's never felt right to me. So I always lived in crossover neighborhoods that were racially and ethnically diverse. And that's always where I felt most comfortable. And so that was something that I took with me. And then when I really got serious about college, I went for a while, dropped out, went back. I was very steeped in feminism already because my mother was a political feminist. She really had her feminist awakening in the mid-70s. I came of age during that time. I graduated from high school in 77, so I was very much steeped in feminism also. And how feminism grew out of civil rights, because my parents were both involved with civil rights when I was younger. And then my mom really became a feminist, and feminism grew out of the civil rights movement to a large degree. And so I went back to college. I got very interested in feminist literary theory and how that helped me to start really seeing social structure and our assumptions and our ways of understanding the world and how much we're conditioned by everything around us, whether that was the media, whether that was the textbooks that we had, whether it was the fairy tales, or the movies that we watched, whatever it is, that how conditioned we were. At that time, we were talking about patriarchy, right? And I do want to say here, patriarchy does not equal men. Okay, patriarchy is a system of domination that is based in brutality and coercion that privileges the most powerful men. Okay, and patriarchy has been very hard on women, and it's been really hard on men also. And then when you add colonialism with that, then you also get racism, and you get colonial and post-colonial issues that is something that became a part of my graduate studies. When I went to graduate school, I had the good fortune to be in school with, went to a literature department rather than English department. So I was there with people who were studying Spanish literature and French literature and critical studies. And so I got to work alongside people who were all different ethnicities, all different nationalities, spoke many different languages, and we were largely interested in the post-colonial issues that included patriarchy, but also really took account of the European takeover of the globe and the aftermath of that. And so what emerged from me was my interest and devotion to African American studies, in particular to the literature and the experience of African American women, which started with kind of contemporary literature with Toni Morrison, but then really I had the good fortune to have as my mentor a woman named Frances Smith Foster, who is one of the preeminent experts in 17th and 18th and 19th century African American women's writing and African Americans writing, African women's writing. And so she mentored me. I was her research assistant. She helped direct my dissertation. And so I worked with her to help bring back into print, particularly Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was one of the most preeminent African-American women writers of the 19th century. And so I helped her write a biography. I did a lot of research for that, primary research for that. And then we also helped to bring back into print selections of her poetry and her novel, and so on. So I was really steeped in that. And What I did not want to happen as a white person and as a white woman is I didn't want to get slotted into African American studies, because I felt that my place as a scholar and as a scholarly activist, if you will, was to address the dominant narrative of the United States that would privilege me as a white person, and to look to recast, if you will, or reconfigure or reframe that dominant narrative that we have, right? That comes from the Boston Tea Party and the Declaration of Independence and even the Constitution, right? About rebellion against despots, and the righteous rebellion of all men, right? To recast that dominant narrative together with the history of slavery. Because of course slavery was there, right, at the time that all of that was happening, when the privileged white men who were all landed um, created the first sovereign state. So they took sovereignty away from the monarchy and they invested it into this new creation called the United States. It's the creation of the first sovereign state that was not based in a monarchy. And that was a really important historical event that occurred. And it did change power relationships. And at the same time, there was still slavery that was going on. And I'm not going to, there's a lot I could say about all of this. One of the things that happened is that there were Black men who owned property in the North, who were free because slavery wasn't in the North, who actually were able to vote in the first years after the Constitution, because they met the property requirement, okay? And it wasn't actually until the beginning of the 19th century when the word white was inserted into voting requirements. They removed the property requirements and inserted the word white, that it became a white supremacist document. Now, of course, practices made it effectively so that it was primarily white men who were voting, but it wasn't legally in law until Andrew Jackson in the early 19th century. Anyway, there's a lot I could say about that. But so that was where I went with my scholarship. And I did write a dissertation, which later became my book, which is this book, which was called The Slumbering Volcano: American Slave Ship Revolts and the Production of Rebellious Masculinity. And what I discovered, which was not surprising, but I really researched it and was able to account for it in a variety of different documentation, that in order for those who were rebelling to be seen as human beings with the right to rebel, is they had to assert their masculinity. And actually, women were not really able to do that in the same way that, for example, Frederick Douglass was able to do that, or who wrote The Heroic Slave. And you may know him from, the narrative of Frederick Douglass and My Life as Frederick Douglass and a variety of other things. I hope you do. If you don't know Frederick Douglass, go find out about him, just like you should go find out about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. But the women who were writing at that time, like Frances Harper, were not using the language of rebellion. That was not actually available to them. Interestingly enough, they found other ways to create positions for them to speak. So having said all of that, I feel very qualified to talk about this historical way in which race, gender, class, status, resource, and so on is embedded into our legal system, our social structure, and also our way of thinking, our belief system. And it is something that is always alive for me and always within me. I haven't been doing that academic work for 2 decades now, but it has never, the experience of growing up in a Black neighborhood and the experience of doing the scholarship and having the good fortune to work with Frances, who's also African-American, has never left me. And so I feel qualified to speak about those things. I do not feel qualified to speak about the African-American experience. In those cases, what my job, that I've always taken my job to do, is to present those who speak about it, and to do what I can to use my privilege to make a space to present what it is that they have to say. I don't want to cry. What it is that they have to say about their experience. And that's one of the ways that I can use my privilege. And so even now here on Facebook, that's what I'm doing. I'm not speaking about my experience so much. I am posting the experience of African American people who are talking, and who are providing direction, and who are just venting, or who are asking for help. Whatever it is, there's a whole range of different voices and points of view that I've been posting on my Facebook page, because I feel like that is what I can do now. And then I'm also here to be able to talk about sovereignty, and how that intersects with privilege, how that intersects with our consciousness and our belief system, and what is the developmental process that we can go through as we awaken, and as we develop, and as we mature, and as we move out of this sense of entitlement that so many of us have without really thinking about it. It's like, but I see a lot of entitlement on what people are saying on Facebook. They're just like, oh my God, I'm so inconvenienced by what's happening. I'm so inconvenienced. It's like, oh God, I'm so sorry for you if you feel inconvenienced right now. I mean, I feel a lot for the people who don't have the grocery stores in their communities anymore because they've been burned down. That I have a lot of compassion for. Anyway, okay. I can go on a rant right now, but I'm not going to. All right. I'm going to take a breath and a sip of water. What time it is? Okay. All right. I want to give a little example from the book that I'm currently writing, that I hope might give you some insight to how you might take a look at what your belief system is. And this is primarily aimed for white people. So those of you who are people of color who are here, you will probably have a different version of this, or you might be like, oh, okay, I get that, like from your point of view, but it's primarily for white people, okay? And I'll just give you an example. So I've been writing this book on sovereignty. I've been working on sovereignty forever. And I realized at a certain point, and this is my initial orientation, was like, I really need to write this book for women, because my experience for women is so much stronger. I don't really know what men's experience is like. Like, I talk to men, I've read about men, I've studied men to some degree. How could you not study men, since they are the center of virtually all scholarship and most media? But I don't really understand their experience. So I was like, okay, I'm really going to start focusing more on women. And I thought about what my experience was like when I was in graduate school, and some things came, and I was writing about that. And I was writing about queens, actually, and Snow White, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and how she got crowned and all that. And then I was like, honey, like, Black women call each other queens all the time. We've got Queen Bey, like what is going on? Like, you need to, like, all right. And then all of a sudden I started to open up my perspective, because I'd started one place, and then I opened my perspective, and then I was like, oh no, I need to open it more. And so now there's this, the not just adding on something about African-American women, but actually bringing in what that perspective has to say into and changing my whole discussion about queens. And then that changing my whole understanding about sovereignty. So this is the piece about how, when you go, oh, how do we reframe these things together? Rather than going, like, probably in your history book, you got to learn about the dominant narrative of US history. And then over there on the side, there was like, oh yeah, and by the way, there was slavery. And oh yeah, by the way, there were Native Americans, but most of them died. Most of them were killed, actually. So that's not how we want it to go. It's not like here's the dominant and then here's a little bit and then there's a little bit. What we want to do is we want to take those things that have been on the sides and we want to bring them in and change the whole story, change the whole narrative. Okay. And that's big work. Okay. And I'm just doing it again with my book. And so I want to invite you, whatever your perspective is to take a look at your own life and to go, wow, what dominant narrative am I living inside of? What is the story of my life? What is the story that I have that I'm living inside of right now about what's going on in the United States, right? What is that? And how do I begin to bring other voices in, not so that they're like a, on the side and now, oh yeah, let's remember too, but no, let's actually bring them in so that that dominant story changes. Okay. And it's not to throw out things that are good, okay, and beneficial and helpful for everyone from the dominant narrative, because there are, like I said, give me liberty or give me death. All men and women are created equal, meaning everybody of all colors. That's a good statement. Okay. It's just, we didn't realize it in this country, right? But it's still a good statement. We don't throw the whole thing out, right? But we want to reframe what our dominant narrative is about that. So I invite you to think about what that is for you and how that might change your self-perception first, and then your perception of what's going on around you. So sovereignty, in my view, is about the inner journey first, okay? It's about the inner journey first, and then it becomes about our outer actions, right? So it's inward and then outward. And the inner journey, wait, let me just collect my thoughts here for a second. This is not, like I said, this is a practice. It's not a destination. So what I mean by that, when I say there's the inner journey and there's the outer actions, I don't mean that to say you're going to do the inner journey and then you're going to do outer actions and then you never have to do the inner journey again. It's not like that. It's not a linear progression. It's a spiral. It's a spiral. So I did not think that I was going to be coming back, although I probably should have known, to talking about race relations and white privilege and so on with sovereignty inside of Sovereignty by Design. I didn't think about that, right? But now I'm spiraling back through my history because of how I've been reminded and stimulated and provoked to do that because of what's going on in the outer world. So then I get to go back into my inner journey and go, okay, so what's going on inside of me that I needed this to happen, and what is my role now? What is my work? What is my work to do? And it definitely has influenced the way I thought about, like I said, what I just did with my book. But our level of consciousness, okay, really influences and even determines our actions and our tone, and our intent. All of that, right? And so we need to work on our consciousness and developing our consciousness. And I think that's why so many people out there, whatever color they are, for those of us who are white, who maybe have never really thought about some of these things before, are saying, you really need to read, you really need to listen, you really need to pay attention, but you don't need to talk a lot right now, because you need to open your mind. You need to do consciousness raising, which was our feminist, thing 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, right? You need to raise your consciousness. You need to open your mind. You need to strip away that entitlement and strip away the way the privilege has kept you from seeing the way that things are right now. And that is part of the journey to sovereignty. Because if we are living inside of these conditioned points of view where we can't even see what's true for other people, we are not sovereign, okay? We are tools of the machines, right? The systems that have programmed us to be a certain way. And I'm not saying this to make those of us who still feel kind of clueless, you know, or like, wow, I'm just waking up, or even those of us who are like, I would really not rather think about this right now, you know, not to make you bad people, you know, like those of us who are in that, we're not bad people, but we're not awake either, and we're not mature, and we're not sovereign. So I want to say a few more things about sovereignty, and then I definitely want to hear from you. This is what I always do, and I don't want to talk the whole time. So please do start be putting some of your comments, questions, ahas, oh no's, whatever, into the chat and into the comments, and let's talk about it. All right, but I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about sovereignty and how it relates to human design, and then over subsequent weeks we'll be diving into this even more. So I've been working with a kind of developmental trajectory, if you will, about sovereignty for a long time, like 15, 20 years. And it's to make peace with the past in order to come fully into the present so that we can command the future. Okay, make peace with the past so we can come fully into the present in order to command the future. Now, again, what I want to say, this is actually more of a spiral, because my experience is that we need to make peace with the past over and over and over again. And right now, our country is being shown big time, like, what do we actually need to face and digest and integrate and evolve in order for us to make peace with our past, right? So we don't make peace with the past once and for all, either as individuals, as communities, as the collective. It's something that we're going to do over and over again. And as we do that, we then are able to become more in the present, okay? Because we can't be in the present if we're always being pulled into the past, or if we're continually living in a traumatized state by what has happened in the past, right? Or if we're living in an entitled state because of what's happened in the past, right? All of it, both sides, or all sides of that, okay? So we need to really grapple with, we might even add grapple with first, the past, and make peace with it in order to come into the present. Because in order to be present, in order to be able to command and to really be sovereign, we have to be in the present. If we're too in the past, we're probably too run by our emotions and by our trauma. And I actually do want to give you a little resource here that I just checked out. I hope I get this right. Resma.com. This is a, oops, I didn't do that to everybody. This is the website of a man who is a somatic psychotherapist, and he's African American, and he has been doing some really great work in different communities, and he's got this little free 5-day thing about, like, the pain body of all different shapes and sizes and colors. And so go check it out. So anyway, and his point is if we're, if we're so locked in our trauma, and it can be our ancestral trauma too, it doesn't have to even be from our own lives, which is something that I talked about for a long time. It could be ancestral, and it can also be from other lives. So that for me is, some of the foundations for sovereignty. And then I want to just name some qualities of sovereignty. And this is a work in progress, okay? So the first one is, and I would call these keynotes, okay? And they're all connected to human design as well. So being creative. We are all natural creative beings, but we don't necessarily know or express our creativity. Being in possibility thinking. Being in command of the narrative that we're living inside of, understanding that we are co-creating our experience with spirit, and with the forces that are around us in our life. Being able to not act like a victim, to be able to step out of victim consciousness. This lives in the gate 28. It also lives in the head in the gate 61. And, you know, we've talked about the 28 in actually the very first Resiliency by Design. The second one is emotional intelligence, being able to be responsive rather than reactive, knows and accepts oneself, is confident and stable, able to come back to neutral after being triggered. And this is in the G center, which is really the center for love, and the emotional solar plexus, which is our creativity, and the spleen, which is where fear primarily lives in the chart. The third part is embodied, physically vital, grounded, present, has presence, has body wisdom. And this is in the gate 46, which is part of the G center, and it is in the love of the body, but it's also in the sensing circuit. And then number 4 is being a great communicator. And this is actually one of these last two I want to talk a little bit more about. Oh, it's not. All right, Mary, I'll find the right, you know what, try this one. I think that's right. Let me know if it's not. Okay, and I'll definitely go find it. Okay, so these last two, being a great communicator. So, and how this really rates, because a lot of people think that sovereignty has to do just with one's own autonomy or one's independence. And there is an element of that for sure. It is about being able to speak one's mind. It is about, you know, kind of having this inner power and inner authority, or power and authority that come from the inside. It's not about power over. Okay. It is about feeling this sense of empowerment from the inside. Okay, that is the right link. And the reason that I say this is that why I think sovereignty is so important is that the next step from developing our own inner journey and becoming more sovereign ourselves is about our ability to relate to each other as sovereign beings and acknowledging each other's sovereignty. And this is this is what enables us to become great communicators. And part of this is, yes, we need to be articulate. We need to be able to express ourselves well, but we also need to listen. We need to be able to hear other points of view, even when we don't agree with them, or even when they make us uncomfortable, even when they make us scared. We need to be able to hear them. We need to be able to expand, to hold multiple points of view in our minds at the same time. Even the great spiritual teachers will say that this is, the highest aspect of spiritual growth, is being able to become the space for all of it, if you will. But, I hear this over and over again from ancient spiritual teachings about we really need to be able to move out of our own perspective and hold many, and to do that without judgment. Okay, that doesn't mean we don't have a moral code. It doesn't mean that we don't have values, but it does mean that we're able to step outside of our self-centeredness, like I was talking about before, and our entitlement and our privilege to be able to really hear and take in other points of view, other histories, other stories that we don't initially like necessarily. I mean, one of the things I've been doing on Facebook lately is just, I'm seeing white men like challenge people's stories or things that people are saying. And I'm like, don't you think it would be better to listen right now? Be curious rather than trying to dominate and tell somebody that what they're saying is inaccurate. I mean, is that really your place right now? Whew, okay. Yeah, and to be influenced by others, just like I was saying regarding the changing the dominant narrative, is also to be able to change ourselves, to be influenced, not just hear or be able to take it in, but actually be influenced by other people's points of view, to decide to do something different, to act in the world in a different way. Like, I'm going back and rethinking big parts of my book because I was like, oh, I need to reframe this now, right? I'm taking different actions because I allowed myself to be influenced from something that actually came out of my own mind, but still it wasn't initially there. So in allowing ourselves to be influenced by others, as well as being expressive and influential. This, of course, lives in many parts of the chart. It lives in the gate 26 and the 13 and the 54 in the throat center. And then the last one is concern for all. true benevolence, the ability to see the big picture, to hold multiple perspectives and can see the interconnectedness of all of life, and to have values that are set that include definitely all parts of humanity, but also include all of our companion species and our ecosystems, right? We are on, with climate change, we're on the brink of environmental collapse, in my lifetime, or certainly in the lifetime of my child, if we don't wake up to this situation. And of course, racial inequities and racism are feed the environmental issues that we are in. I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but it's deep. They're all deeply embedded because it's part of our post-colonial context where we think that Earth is there for our taking, right? And so there's a lot to unpack in there. And this comes really from the 31, which is democratic leadership. It can come from the 45, which is natural leadership. And I want to make one more comment about this, and then I want to really dialogue with you, which is Donald Trump, our president, has the gate 45 in his defined in his chart. Here he has the whole channel. And he and I love the way he has 45 on his shirt, because he's the 45th president. But he is an excellent example of the shadow side of the 45, which is the despot, right? The dictator, the narcissist, right? The fragile ego, the one who needs power, who is oblivious to truth, to justice. I could go on and on. But it's kind of ironic that we are having right here in our country an example of a dictator in the White House that we've never had the way that we have it. I mean, it's not that we've had, not all of our presidents have been great. I sure do miss Barack Obama these days. He wasn't perfect either, but my God, can you imagine a study in contrast right now? I mean, he was much more of the 31, much more of the Democratic leader. Like I said, not perfect. Michelle Obama is actually closer to that. But still, a huge study in contrast right now that we see between the 45 and the 31. And so these are all elements that are in the human design chart that we'll be talking about more and more, and that are going to be an aspect of my book. And these are some of the keynotes of what I believe we need to evolve into as sovereign beings, living in a world where we recognize others as sovereign beings, and we support others in becoming more and more sovereign. And we realize we're on this journey together. It's a practice, and we find a way to be able to listen to each other. And if we get reactive, we go out and we run around and we breathe, and we do whatever we need to do to move that energy so we can come back and actually pay attention to each other and listen, and not, flame each other, attack each other, and so on. Like, there is just way too much of that going on right now. Okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to stay on kind of as long as you want to talk. I'll go a few minutes late if you want to. All right, so let's see what you want to talk about today. Please go ahead and put in your comments, your questions, your ahas, whatever it is that you might want to share. I definitely want I want to hear your voices in here as well. Okay. Okay, so Sasha T says, and she's in Willits. She says, as an African-American, I appreciate your voice helping non-African Americans understand their role in America growing up. Yes. I feel like that is part of my assignment, is to help other white people, get some of this, right? It's not my job to tell Black people that. Yes. Okay. And then Ellen Shapiro says, I appreciate your including listening to others as part of sovereignty. Absolutely. What are the elements of sovereignty that you listed? Taking notes, inclusive of sovereignty. You know what, Alan, I think you might need to go back and, because I just said what they were. This is recorded, so you can get them on the recording. But I mean, basically they're, possibility thinking, being creative, being in command of the narrative. 2 is being emotionally intelligent. And 3 is being embodied and having physical vitality and being present, having body wisdom, as opposed to just this mental, we've had way too much emphasis on our left brain and our minds, a lot of times when I'm working around with people, they are just living, like, they're not even living here, they're like living up here. And it's like helping people to get down into their bodies, because our bodies give us so much wisdom. And of course, this is where trauma lives, which is why a lot of people are not in their bodies. Which is why Resma's thing is really good. If you notice that you're popping out of your body all the time and you don't feel like you're in your body. So that's a piece. Okay, so that's the connection there. Great communicator, articulate and able to listen and be influenced by others, as well as being expressive and to be influential. And then 5 is concern for all, true benevolence, the ability to see the big picture and multiple perspectives. And can see the interconnectedness of all of life, and then to take action on those perspectives. Okay, so those are some of the keynotes for sovereignty. Okay, so Mary says, I'm confused because these gates are in the throat. Not all, they're all over the chart, actually, Mary. I'm told as a generator, I don't have the throat defined, but that center is colored in wait, okay, I'm not sure I'm following this. I'm told as a generator, I don't have the throat defined. No, many generators have their throat defined. I'm not sure where you got that, but that center is colored in means it's active. Okay, Mary, could you restate that? I'm not quite understanding that. So just as a reminder for everyone has the whole chart, okay? Everyone has access to all of the energies in the chart. Whether they're colored in or whether they're white. So whether you have it colored in or whether you have it white, you have access to those energies. If it's colored in, then you have ongoing, ready, reliable access to those energies and a consistent, even fixed way of experiencing them, which can be either beneficial or not so much, depending on if you're more attuned to the awakened side or to the shadow side. Okay. If it's white, it means you've experienced those energies many, many times, but you experience them because of the way that they've been, you've taken it in from other people and amplified it. And then it becomes imprinted in your system. And what happens over time is you have the ability to decide, oh, I'm going to activate that energy and I can utilize it. I hope in the, conscious and awakened aspect. But you can't do that over time. You can't sustain it because it's not defined in your chart, but you definitely have it. So Mary, tell me if that does or doesn't clarify your comment. Okay, Mary says, I must have misunderstood that the generator. Okay, what makes a generator is that they have a defined, let me just see if I can find, I usually have my chart line around here. They have a defined, we have a defined sacral. It doesn't have anything to do with the throat, okay? So what makes a generator, this is my chart, is that we have this red square, okay? I happen to not have a defined throat, but this is what makes a generator a generator. Lots of generators also have a defined throat. Some generators have that throat, that defined throat connected to a motor. If it's connected to a motor, that makes them a manifesting generator. I have 2 motors defined, but neither one of them is connected to the throat, so I'm not a manifesting generator. Okay, but there are also generators who have defined throats who are not manifesting generators because that throat is not connected to a motor. So that's a little more in depth. Yeah, Mary, tell me if that makes sense, or if you want to know more something else. Okay, let me go to Sheila Merles. What can I do in this period of unrest and focus on police brutality? Well, so actually, I think a lot of people are asking that question, and I appreciate the question. And one thing I'll say is it's good to ask me because I'm white, but don't ask a Black person that, because they don't really want to hear that right now. Honestly, they're like, you know, go do your own work. So here, I just put in the chat is an article. It has 75 things white people can do for racial justice. It's actually a pretty good article. It's written by a white woman. And she says it's continually being updated. So take a look at that at Sheila Merle and see. And there's a big range of things. Like there's things like you can call your local police department. There's ways you can go find out like what their like what their approval rating is, what their behavior rating, how they behaved, if there have been complaints against them and so on. And then you can call the police department and let them know how upset you are that this has happened. So there's things like that. There's books you can read, there's movies you can watch, there's suggestions for groups you can form. I mean, there's like, there's things all over the place right now for things that people can do. And so I would start there, Sheila Merle, and then just keep tuning in, because this will be part of our conversation as we go forward in these Wednesday webinars. Okay, let me just see. So Sherry says, I may not be understanding. Would a projector not have innate sovereignty until influenced by another, a generator with a defined center? So by ourselves, projectors don't, no. That's not what I mean at all, Sherry, no. Anyone can develop sovereignty regardless of their human design type. It doesn't actually have anything to do with that. And I'm sorry if I suggested that. It might have kind of come out of this little convoluted exchange I had with Mary. Let me just speak kind of directly to this matter of human design and sovereignty. Okay, anyone can develop sovereignty regardless of their type, regardless of their profile, regardless of their definition. Okay, what your chart, your body graph looks like does not determine whether or not you can be sovereign. Anyone can become sovereign. What it might do is make suggestions to you about some of the things you may need to do in your own personal inner journey in order to become sovereign. Okay, and that can be different by type. And we'll be talking about that as we go forward. So it could be different for a projector than it would be for a generator or a manifesting generator, but it doesn't mean that they can't do it. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it at that for right now. And Sherry, let me know if you have another question that would relate to that, okay? But I think the short answer I would say is that human design can help us become sovereign by showing us how to live in alignment with our design, how to live in alignment with our type and our profile, and to use our strategy and to embrace our inner authority and learn how to make decisions with our authority. Human design is very countercultural. When you really get into it, it's one of the things that totally drew me to it, is it's so countercultural. And so it helps us break out of our programming and our conditioning. And ultimately, it leads us back to our own inner authority. Everybody is back in our own inner authority, right? And everybody has an inner authority. I know sometimes those projectors, you get, it says down here where it says inner authority and it says none, No, that's not how I hold it at all. You just have a different type of inner authority, okay? And that's about authority for projectors. So we'll talk about it another time. But anyway, so that's what I think human design can do for us regarding sovereignty. Okay, and kind of the short version. All right. Okay. Annaline says, thank you, Maggie, for sharing your fascinating story and eye-opening insights. I resonate with the sovereignty vision for all. So glad you're writing your book. Thank you. Yay, thank you. Mary Feynman says, thinking about your description of racism early on, that it is always attached to power. I don't know the dictionary definition, doesn't matter, but it seems to me that anytime you are judged by some aspect of your humanness, your skin color, your religion, your size, there's an ism. And anytime someone looks at you and believes you could not possibly understand their experience because you didn't have their direct experience, that presumes that empathy could not be there. I find that troubling. Isn't that how we create the other? Are we allowed to even mention empathy? Whew, there's a lot packed in there, Mary. Let me see what I can do with that, all right? I made a distinction between racism and prejudice because in my experience, growing up, and during the times that we've had like this, like when the Rodney King incident happened, during the time I was writing my dissertation in 92, 93, I think that's when it was. And now, is sometimes defensive white people, what if they've been said, if you know, and here's the thing: sometimes people just get called racist, and some people just friggin' are racist, you know. But there are people. I mean, they're actively racist. Okay, they're like white supremacists. Okay, I think of actively racist people as being white supremacists. Okay. Then there are people who are unconsciously racist. They don't know any better. Like they never, you know, and they're entitled and they're privileged and they kind of don't know. And somebody calls them a racist. And then they turn around and they go, well, you know, Black people, you know, think X, Y, and Z about us, so they're racist. Okay. So this is where I made the distinction between racism and prejudice, because in the way that I think, in the way that I've been trained and taught, is that prejudice is when we have stereotypes about other people, right? We slot people into stereotypes and we say, you know, whatever, like you could say, oh, you know, all white men are just, you know, white men in suits who don't give a shit about anybody and they just are concerned with profits and, you know, it's just not true. I mean, there are lots of white men for whom that's not true. That is a prejudice, right? It's a stereotype. And anybody can think that. I can think that, right? A white person can think that too, right? So that's a prejudice. It's like male privilege or male, or like sexism, right? Is sexism, like I don't think I can really be sexist. I think I can be prejudiced against men, but I can't really be sexist because I don't have the power, right? So this is a lot to kind of unpack and digest. So I would just invite you to be curious about that. And this is kind of from human design too, is to be curious and to ask questions rather than to try to figure it out and define it, which is the way we've been trained to do. Okay, we've been trained to want to be definitive and to define and make it be so. Whereas what human design teaches us is that we are at our best when we are asking questions, when we are curious, when we're in this possibility state. Okay, which is that 61 that I said was the very beginning of sovereignty, right? Is that creativity where we're asking questions and we're then paying attention to what does the outer world bring to us that we get to respond to, okay? But there's another thing here about empathy. And I think that, okay, let me see how I want to articulate this. Because empathy is also built into this definition of sovereignty, right? When I said the ability to listen and be influenced by other people's perspective. Okay. And you could call that empathy, or there could be empathy, right? Where you could imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. You could imagine that. You could use your powers of imagination and your creativity to imagine that. And yet I would like to say, if you haven't lived that person's experience, you're not going to know it the way that they do. Like you just can't. Like even growing up in a Black neighborhood and all, you know, like I would never say that I know what it's like to be Black. Like I don't think there's anything I can do to really know what it's like to be Black. I can be informed, I can take it in, I can open my heart, I can be changed, I can be influenced, I can care, right? I can be empathetic. But can I say I really know? No, I don't know what it's like to be afraid to be pulled over by a cop the same way that a Black woman would feel, or certainly a Black man would feel. No, I can't really know what that's like. I don't believe that. And I think it's if we fundamentally believe that we can do that, that's an element of white privilege, okay, or an element of our privilege. And I think we just have to be like, you know what, it's okay. Like nobody can really live somebody else's life, but we can care, we can pay attention, we can be influenced, we can open our hearts, we can decide to take new actions, we can help to change our world so that you know, people can be more safe, people can have more opportunity, people can be more resourced, right? There's a lot we can do, but I don't really think it's necessary for us to say that we can 100% understand somebody else's experience. Yeah. Okay, I hope that answered your question. I said a lot about that. Mary, you kind of got me going on something here. Okay. Sherry says, another basic question. I'm single and live on my own. And now with the home quarantine, I don't really get together with friends or anyone in person. How much less influence is non-in-person interactions with someone who has centers defined? In other words, is in-person or virtually equally connective between defined and non-defined centers? Okay, that did it. It answers my first question. Okay. My experience is that we can be influenced by other people's definition in our openness online. I'm not sure how it is in this format where we're not seeing each other so much. Like, you might be influenced by my definition. I don't know that I'm so influenced by your definition because I'm not seeing you, you know, and I'm not feeling you that same way. But my experience is, like, when I'm in Zoom meeting, which is a different format than this, and everybody's there and I'm tuning into different people, that yes, I am influenced by their energy. And then the other piece is that over time, we have experienced all those energies. And so they become a kind of repository of energy for us to be able to draw on. So maybe that's what you were referring to, Sherry. Okay. Okay, Kate, great. Thanks for being here. Mary is saying, I'm nodding in agreement for sure. That is nuanced and hard to discuss in the chat. Yeah, no, I know, exactly. And I appreciate the question, actually. And you know, I really invite you to be sharing with me, because it will influence. I'm open to be influenced by the things that you bring up as I'm writing my book and as I'm teaching this. You know, I really do want your input. So you can put it in the chat. You can write me an email. You can put it on the Facebook page. Mary says, totally agree. So I feel like empathy you can't have if you can't experience. Well, I think you can have empathy to a degree. I do feel like we can have empathy, but I don't think it's total. That's basically what I'm saying, is I don't think it's total, right? And Marshall Rosenberg, you know, the founder of nonviolent communication, is really, really good on this. And he's kind of like the king of empathy, right? And he has done a lot of work in very intense environments, including prisons, and going to develop empathy with, you know, Black men who've been incarcerated for violent crimes, to really want to understand what's going on for them. And he's got some he has some really deep understanding about their experience, because of how much he wanted to get to know their experience and what they shared with him. I don't think it's the same as compassion and mercy. I really don't. Empathy, in my view, so again, we could be doing semantics here, so let's not get caught up in semantics. Compassion, I don't think, is the same as empathy at all. For me, empathy is much more walking in somebody's shoes. It's much more actually developing a visceral experience based on what someone else is sharing with you. Like you're really trying to put yourself in that person's position. Compassion doesn't require that. And in fact, compassion has a degree of detachment to it. It's like, I'm not going there, and yet I care, and yet my heart is there, and yet I'm connected. Whereas empathy, and again, I think people, would define empathy differently. They would practice empathy differently. I would send you to Marshall Rosenberg for what he has to say about empathy. He's far more of an expert on it than I am. Okay, and Sherry says, yes, a depository of energy inside of me from past interactions. I'm drawing on the memories and I'm influenced just the same. Exactly. And then you have choices about what energies do you want to use or not, because you will have been exposed to both more shadow aspects and more awakened aspects of all of the archetypes in the chart. There's over 100, right? And so you get to be like, oh, I didn't really like, the way that, like, go back to the gate 28, right? The gate 28, which is traditionally the channel of struggle, right? And victim consciousness in its lowest expression, in its shadow. It's like victim consciousness. It's like, oh, I'm sure you experienced that from people, right? We all have. We've probably embodied it. We've probably, been there at some point. So, but then we get to go, oh, but how do I turn struggle into challenge, and challenge into opportunity, and opportunity into adventure? Actually, the very first teaching I did in the group was on that. You can go find that if you want. And so, that's kind of the developmental process that human design gives us, is where we can, through our soul curriculum, we can go from the more shadow aspect of any of the archetypes into the more awakened aspect. And when you're able to take your 28, which I have, and you're able to turn it into adventure, what happens is you go, oh, the challenge that's happening right now, like I'm doing that right now, like, wow, we've got a lot of friggin' challenge going on, from so many different places. It's like, okay, how do I see that as an adventure? It's an opportunity and even an adventure for me in terms of what is my role? What can I do? And that's what doing this webinar is all about. What's my role? How can I embrace that as an adventure? And that's also available to me. I hope that clarified that piece. Okay, let's see. We're getting late here, so see if there's much more that you want to talk about. And I'll go over to actually go see what's happening on Facebook. All right. There's some of you who are still watching on Facebook. So if you want to make any comments, please do so now, and I'll be coming right over there. Let me just take this one from Janice. Janice says, how, if at all, do you see the upcoming changes in 2027 relating to the systemic racism we are currently seeing? Well, the short answer to that, Janice, is a great question. The short answer to that is that we are moving from the spleen center, which is the center for instinct, right? Intuition, but instinctual intuition, over to the emotional solar plexus, which is our center for creativity, which allows us, when we are in command of our emotional state, which is part of being sovereign. Practicing sovereignty is being in command of our emotional state, right? Not being reactive, but actually being able to respond. Okay. We then calibrate our emotional state, and then we calibrate our G center, which is our heart, right? And that's where we create from. So rather than creating from the fear of the spleen, the instinctual fear of the spleen, we begin to create as we are in command of our emotional state, and we are calibrating the power of the heart, because the heart is immensely powerful, right? It's 5,000 times more powerful than the brain in its magnetic force, okay? Our emotions are what we primarily radiate out, right? Resonate out into the field. When we're able to really be in command of that, and this is what the solar plexus mutation is bringing to us, then we can step out of fear and instinctual fear. And I think that racism and systemic racism, well, systemic racism is a little bit different because it's based in social structure and in law and infrastructure, you know what I mean? It's all that kind of stuff. But in terms of our own racism, that's based in fear. right? It's based in instinctual fear, where people feel like, oh, you know, I'm in danger, so I need to fight back, right? What is white supremacy? White supremacy comes, well, now in our country, like what we're seeing right now. I mean, historically, anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But it's coming from fear, right? It's coming from fear. People won't, you know, the guys with the assault rifles won't acknowledge that, but that is the base of it. It's instinct, right? And it's base, and it's not thoughtful. It's coming from the amygdala. It's not coming from the the frontal lobe, right? And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And so that's what that has, you know, in the short version, Janice, I would say, has to do with that. So if you're still watching, I'd love to hear how that lands for you. Okay, let me just see if there's a couple more things here. Mary Feynman says, I think there's a lot of recent brain studies on the difference between empathy and compassion. Apparently, empathy lights up a different part of the brain and is ultimately draining. Compassion becomes renewing. I'll try to find a link to that. Okay, well, I don't know anything about those brain studies. And again, I think there's a certain point at which we might have semantics and how we're practicing these different things. I think empathy is draining if we allow someone else's negative downward spiraling energy to take over our own. But I don't think that has to happen. I don't let that happen for me most of the time. So that's just my personal experience. Okay. And Mary Gachin says, good points. I just get tired of people saying, understand. Yeah, no, I get it, Mary. I mean, that's the thing is people say, I understand. And you're like, no, you don't. I want you to get the distinction. I want you to get the difference. So yes, I understand. And I think that that's where we really have to become much more intelligent, and we have to become much more open and willing to listen and to be influenced and to change our points of view, allow ourselves to take in these. This is what I'm saying sovereignty is all about, right? Is to be able to become much more intelligent in all of our intelligences. I'm not just talking about our mental intelligence. I'm talking about our emotional intelligence, our body intelligence, right? Our spiritual intelligence, our heart intelligence, right? There's all these different aspects, our energetic intelligence, right? We need all of those to be developed in order for us to become truly sovereign, in my view. This is what the journey to sovereignty is all about. And like I said, it's a practice more than a destination. All right. And I think what you said about being detached and compassionate was right on too. Okay. All right. And then Janice says, thanks so much. At some point, would like to hear the long answer to maybe a future topic. Okay, great. I will see about that. I would need to give some more thought to the solar plexus mutation, but it's really up. So I think I will do that. Thank you for the prompt, Janice. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and I just want to reiterate to any of you, please do like just what Janice said. She's saying, I would love to hear more about this, other things that you want to hear more about, because I want my book to be really relevant. I want these webinars to be relevant to all of you, and one of the ways I can do that is by you telling me about what you want, what you need. All right, everybody. So be patient, be kind, be open, do what you can, donate money, donate time, donate energy where you can, help to evolve yourself and our world. Many blessings, much love. Bye for now.